Hi everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Andy Oakley Investigates. It's the 20th of February 2025. In this podcast, I delve into issues that often fly under the radar, those that many don't even recognize as problems, largely due to the prevailing worldview that we're all caught up in. Specifically, I'm interested in truly bad ideas, like how most Western countries currently view government monetary operations. For instance, although these governments operate with fiat currencies and are the only legal issuers of their sovereign currency, they mistakenly believe they should manage their budgets like a household, limiting infrastructure spending to the amount of taxes collected from people and businesses. It's astonishingly stupid for a government to think that money comes from taxpayers when they can simply enter digits into a spreadsheet at the Treasury. And then there's our health ministries, which are mostly death ministries. They promote illness with poor dietary advice while pushing cures through pharmaceuticals and harmful injections. Yet food itself is medicine, and when used correctly can almost eliminate the need for pills and injections. On today's episode, I'm going to discuss one of the worst ideas ever conceived, race. This concept has probably caused more death, torture, and fear than any other. It's a simple yet incredibly powerful notion of us versus them. And while this categorization was more common among tribal groups, racial differences became a prominent idea in the West during the 18th century, solidifying racial theories into the 19th. It's worth noting that almost all well-known eugenicists were educated at Western universities back in the 1800s. The same institutes that today produce economists who don't understand what money is and health professionals who rely on medication, not prevention. However, thanks to one of the largest scientific endeavors, the Human Genome Project, the notion of race as anything more than a harmful construct has been debunked. There is no scientific basis for race. We're all individuals within the human race. If the concept of race infiltrates a country and is accepted through social engineering, that nation is likely to unravel quickly. The repercussions can include social division, segregation, discrimination, psychological and health impacts, economic downturns, political collapse, cultural conflicts, and ultimately physical harm and war, all of which we have witnessed in places like Nazi Germany, where this toxic idea was allowed to fester. It's baffling then that our state-funded and largest radio network, Radio New Zealand, can broadcast a series like Treaty Talks, which at its core perpetuates this us versus them racial narrative. And wouldn't you know it, every guest on the show is a university-educated academic promoting this divisive racism through social engineering, just as they did in Nazi Germany. So today I'll investigate this series, examining how these individuals have positioned themselves as the oppressed us, while casting everyone else as the oppressive them. But first, because every episode discusses the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi and also mentions the 1835 New Zealand Declaration of Independence, or He Waka Putanga, which we'll examine later, let's first explore how these supposedly educated individuals have become racist and why it's considered acceptable for them to teach the rest of the country to be racist as well. On the screen is the final draft of the February 4th Treaty of Waitangi, written by James Busby and given to Henry and Edward Williams to translate into the Ngāpuhi dialect. This document only came to light in 1989 when it was discovered in the home of one of Henry Littlewood's descendants, who was James Clendon's lawyer back in 1840. There was lots of controversy at the time because prior to the discovery of this February 4th final draft, the government had been using an English copy of the treaty in legislation that was based on a draft and rough notes that were written by James Busby on the February the 3rd. That earlier draft wasn't addressed correctly and had ideas and notes inconsistent with Te Tiriti in the Ngāpuhi dialect that was read to them and that the chief signed. And because of that error and inconsistent language in 1975, the government enacted legislation that is at the bottom of all this racism, the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975. And by the way, you will not be able to see that February 4th draft in any government building or online resource because they've buried it. So if I just grab a highlighter here and we quickly have a look at the preamble, it states, whereas on the 6th of February 1840, a treaty was entered into at Waitangi between Her Majesty Queen Victoria and the Maori people of New Zealand. And it states here that whereas the text of the treaty in English language differs from the text in the Maori language. So because of this difference, they have to set up this tribunal. It says down here, Maori means a person of the Maori race of New Zealand and includes any descendant of such a person. They've stated the Treaty of Waitangi Act is between the Queen and Maori. When we have a look at it, it isn't. It's not addressed to Maori at all. They state that there are differences between the English treaty and the Maori treaty. But that's only because they've used the wrong February 3rd notes in legislation. And as I said, worse, they've stated that Maori are a separate race of people, which is an impossibility. There's only one human race, and we are individuals with ancestry back to Africa. As a result of doing that, over a period of about 50 years, the completely separate tribes who arrived here at different times, lived separately, looked different, some fair-skinned, some dark, and some every hue in between, have come to think of themselves as one nation, separate to white people. And it is this juvenile racist nonsense that's at the bottom of the gradual collapse of New Zealand society. This racism could all be swept away by swapping out Busby's February 3rd notes in the legislation for the February 4th final draft, which has no mention of Maori or any other race whatsoever. Because the reality is the Treaty of Waitangi was a document for all New Zealanders. So let's have a look what it says. But before we read the document that was written in 1840, we must first get familiar with the language of 1840. And as I mentioned previously, the tribes of New Zealand were a very diverse range of people, some of whom had arrived more than 7,000 years ago. Others had arrived about 3,500 years ago from South America and originally from Persia. Some were Polynesians that arrived in the 14th century. So there was no one word that united these people except that they lived in New Zealand. So they were natives, aboriginals, or New Zealanders. No one back then or today was ruled in or out from being a New Zealander because of their skin colour, ethnicity or ancestry. And to add some more context to New Zealand's history, from about 1820, various British scholars were compiling dictionaries for missionaries who travelled to New Zealand to introduce Christianity to its inhabitants. They observed that at that time, the various tribes in New Zealand were distinct in every sense of the word. Although not realised at the time, what these scholars were witnessing were the remnants of numerous and intermarried groups that had arrived in New Zealand over at least 7,000 years. And understanding this is crucial when considering the political events that unfolded in New Zealand during the 1960s and 70s. During the mid-1840s and 1850s, there was no social construct known as Maori in New Zealand at the time the Treaty of Waitangi was written and signed. Instead, in New Zealand, there were about 72,000 individual human beings representing all that remained after millennia of one group colonising another over and over. Some of these people had been here for many thousands of years, had pale skin, red hair, and ancestry back to India, the Middle East, and South America. While other groups were related to people from Taiwan who had travelled to New Zealand through Polynesia. Some people living in New Zealand in 1840 had travelled here from Europe, but had lived here for many years, and some were married to some of the natives. And most importantly, there were people who were every mixture of all these people. After all, humans are individuals. We are not groups. Modern day humans are not our ancestors. Now I just grab a highlighter here and we look at the Herbert Williams 1957 6th edition, a dictionary of the Maori language, which was based on the original William Williams dictionary of 1844. It says up here, Maori is an adjective. It just means normal, usual, ordinary, just as we would use the word word ordinary today. Maori, a noun, a person of the native race. Down here it says, no, this use began about 1850. And as I said, it was in the 1800s when the eugenicists or the racists were coming out of the universities in the West. So this is where this concept of race started to come in about 1850, not before. And we know today that there was no native race in New Zealand. This is the preamble, so we can read who is offering the treaty, to whom it is addressed, and the reasons for it in the first place. It also outlines what is being sought in the treaty. Here is Busby's final draft, the 4th of February, the one that was used to translate this document, Te Tiriti. It says in English, Her Majesty Victoria, Queen of England, in her gracious consideration for the chiefs and the people of New Zealand. Right? The people, that's everybody. It says here, Kina rangatira mina hapu onu tarini. The chiefs and people of New Zealand. It goes on to say, and her desires to preserve to them their land and to maintain peace and order amongst them. So that's why, to maintain or to preserve their land and to maintain peace. There's what they want, the cessation of sovereignty. And it says down here, Her Majesty's subjects have already settled here in the country and are consistently arriving, and that it is desirable for their protection as well as the protection of the natives to establish a government amongst them. So this is a government amongst everybody. And you can see on this side that they're using the word Maori with a small m, ordinary people. Tangata is people. Maori is ordinary, just as they use ordinary chiefs, so you know it's a ranking word as opposed to higher chiefs, and again down here. So that's the preamble. If you recall in the preamble, it's stated that the reason behind the treaty was, and her desire to preserve to them their land and to maintain peace and order amongst them. Yeah, many chiefs were selling huge parcels of land to settlers and overseas opportunists, massive parts. Warfare. 622 major battles between the various nations from 1806 to 1845, documented here by Ron Crosby in the Musket Wars. This was the result of which was a population decline from about 120,000 to 72,000. So they lost 40% of the population. So that's why in the preamble it states her desire to preserve them their land and to maintain peace and order amongst them. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the 3 articles. I'll grab a highlighter. So this is the Busby's final draft, the 4th of February. In the article first, the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes and the other chiefs who have not joined the Confederation, so that's all chiefs of New Zealand, cede to the Queen of New Zealand forever the entire sovereignty of their land, or of their country. In the article second, it says the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possession of their lands, dwellings, and all their property. We just have a look at that over on this side. To all the chiefs, tribes, or to the chiefs, tribes, and people of New Zealand in English is translated to Kina rangatira, Kina hapu, Kina tangata katoa onu tirani. So it's exactly the same thing. The tribes and to all the people, tangata katoa, tanga is people, katoa is all, so it's the same thing. And then where it says on the English draft, the possession of their lands, dwellings, and all their property, is written as Te tina rangatira tanga o rātou wenua, o rātou kāinga, me o rātou taonga katoa. So Te tina rangatira tanga o rātou wenua is the possessions of their lands, and the possessions in tribal in the tribal view would be that this is the chief's authority. That's why it says Tina rangatira tanga is the chief's authority. And in the English, it's ownership through rights, which were going to be given to the people in Article 3. If we go on to Article 3, it states, in return for cessation of the sovereignty of the Queen, the people of New Zealand shall be protected by the Queen of England, and the rights and privileges of British subjects will be granted to them. My camera's in the way here, but I think the important thing here, which I'll probably look at in a later video, the people of New Zealand is changed to all the people, all the ordinary people of New Zealand, down here. Tangata people, Māori, ordinary. There's very good reason for that, because the ordinary people of New Zealand, Maori, would have the same rights as chiefs. And this is a major change in New Zealand society. And as I speak here today, there is no political party in this country prepared to repeal the Treaty of Waitangi Act of 1975 other than Li Taitua and his Unite New Zealand Party with their proposed Constitution of New Zealand. They are also the only party possibly in the world that understands government monetary operations. So please, if you want an end to this treaty madness, the racism and poverty, go and check this party out. Okay, back to how the government, the historians, the academics have got the wrong text in the legislation. This is the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975. It has the wrong words in it. It says, Her Majesty's Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand and to the respective families and individuals thereof the full, exclusive and undisturbed possessions of their lands, estates, forests and fisheries, etc. And this is James Busby's draft notes dated from February 3rd. There's marks and notes all over this document. It states in the second article, Her Majesty the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand. So exactly the same wording down here. But this is the document that was translated into Te Tiriti and matches Te Tiriti perfectly. James Busby's final draft dated February 4th, 1840, and the one translated into the Ngāpuhi dialect Te Tiriti. And you can see it says up here, the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possessions of their lands and so on. So this is the correct one. The government have got it wrong in legislation. It's obviously wrong. Back in the mid-70s, when they opened the suitcase that contained the Treaty of Waitangi documents to analyse what the 1840 words meant, they found one of the sheets was in English and it contained about 39 signatures of chiefs from the Waikato area. This sheet had red wax in the top left-hand corner. They also found a very small sheet known as the printed sheet. These two sheets stood out because A, one was very small and contains just a few signatures from chiefs at Waikato, and B, why would there be a sheet in English also with signatures from chiefs in the Waikato? None of those chiefs would have understood a word of English in 1840. However, it is this controversial sheet in English that the New Zealand Parliament have used in legislation. They have labelled that document the official treaty in English. This is the one they used, the one that had the red seal, but this was what was read to them. We'll have a closer look at those two sheets. So let's have a closer look at these two sheets. This is the sheet that was read to the chiefs at Waikato, and these are the signatures that they began signing. Because this is a small sheet, they used this sheet, which had a ruined signature. Here's a close-up. That's a ruined Hobson's signature. This sheet wasn't going anywhere. You would not send this overseas with a ruined sheet like that. So they used this sheet to extend the signatures from here all the way down here to here, and then Shortland got some more later on. So this sheet, the English sheet, is actually irrelevant. Let's now move to the racist social engineering in the Radio New Zealand Treaty Talks videos. But first we must understand a couple of the words that people use in these videos often. So firstly, they use this word a lot, Pakeha. And it really means white person, nothing else. That's what they're referring to. When they use the word Pakeha, they mean a white person. The reality is, though, that there's no such thing as a white person. No one's got white skin. We're all individuals with our own skin colour. Besides, defining people by their skin colour is just racist, childish and derogatory. I don't know why they do it. Another word that you're going to hear all the way through these videos is quite a recent one, tauiwi, which states in the dictionary that it means foreigner, a white foreigner, non-Maori or colonist. But New Zealanders are not foreigners. My family have been here about 180 years. And while some people are happy to be labelled European, I'm not. I'm a New Zealander. And every person who defines as Maori in New Zealand will also have some European ancestry, so this is not clear meaning whatsoever. And no one's a colonist today, but in times gone by, tribes colonized other tribes. So again, there's no clear meaning of what this tauiwi means. And another thing, you cannot be a non-Maori, because Maori, or being Maori, is a social construct. It's just an idea in your head. It's not real. Again, this is racist, childish, and derogatory using this word tauiwi.
So how do we have these conversations with Pakeha, with tauiwi?
Praise the Lord, sis. We already have a whole lot of tauiwi and Pakeha support.
With all this talk of foreign white people going on, from the privileged university qualified academics with their state-funded high-end production companies, although I'm operating at home on a PC, I thought I'd get a screenshot of my skin colour and lay it across these two privileged women's foreheads. And although not very scientific, the results are surprising. I seem to be darker than both of them.
All of our science denies that.
Yeah.
The navigation by the stars, by the planets, the knowledge that is embedded in our mātauranga. And so that's what we brought to Te Reti.
Yeah.
Our science, our knowledge, and our partnership.
This academic thinks that the 542 chiefs who reigned over their own dominions in 1840 and who ceded their own sovereignty to the British Crown by putting their own marks on the treaty over many months all over New Zealand are all one group, her group, Maori. And this is a good illustration of the real problem we have in New Zealand. She has tied her identity to Maori, which is a social construct. Really, she is Ella Henry, a modern day individual. But because she has let her individuality go and tied herself to Maori, a group, I think what she is trying to do is to talk down the violence of the 622 acts of genocide between the various tribes who she identifies as one group, Maori. And by stating all of our science denies that, what she's done is group them together as a race, I suppose, and then attributed scientific brilliance to all of them, or superiority, and imagined that they all brought this brilliance to the white man colonizer when they went into partnership with them in 1840. But this is obviously a delusional story. And because of her academic status, she is using this delusional story to socially engineer her environment and the people's minds she has access to. And people like presenter Rickard and the masses of indoctrinated public of New Zealand lap this rubbish up. However, she does not have to answer for the deeds of people 100 years ago. I certainly wouldn't. I don't even answer for my father's deeds, let alone my great-great-grandfather. Look, I'm not saying the people of New Zealand back then were done. I'm saying that they are just human beings like any other human beings. Some were intelligent and most probably weren't, just like any bunch of humans today. What's more, as an educator, why is she unaware that science and knowledge are not the same thing?
Like, just even the way that they taught it, was that like...
Yeah, it was Pakeha.
While I'm all for free speech, I'm not sure that these kinds of denigrating racial statements are what our government should be funding.
That Māori discovered Aotearoa and Moriori discovered Rekuhu Chatham Islands.
If Maori discover New Zealand, she would need to find who Maori are first, because she needs to explain the caves found all over the north with smashed and cannibalized non-Polynesian skeletons in them. The reality is that although this lady is a lawyer and an educator, she has no idea who discovered New Zealand. Instead, she lumps all 600 or so of the separate tribes together under one name and says that they all discovered New Zealand at the same time. However, some of these tribes, such as Waitangi, Turihuturangi, Ngāti Hautu, and others, were not Polynesian. They were fair-skinned and some of them have been here over 7,000 years ago, killing and cooking moa in the Pakeha swamps in Hawke's Bay. This is yet another attempt to wipe our past by making up delusional stories and teaching them to our children. More social engineering, dishonesty, and indoctrination by academics.
that I put in my education for primary school children is a treaty is a piece of paper with promises between two groups of people on it. I mean, that's as basic as you can get. And if you're talking about Te Tiriti or Waitangi, that's, again, paper, but it's between Māori and the Crown.
Really? Te Tiriti is between Māori and the Crown, is it? She just said that because that's what is written in some modern legislation. She's being dishonest to every child she repeats that lie to. Because although this lady has been chosen as an expert in Te Tiriti, yet she cannot even read the treaty in her own language. The noun Māori is not in Te Tiriti, and it clearly says the chief's family and all the people of New Zealand. If we even forget this English draft that was not used in the legislation and just look at the Ngāpuhi language, it says kina rangatira, kina hapu, kina tangata katoa onu tarini. Rangatira means chief, hapu is families, tangata is people, katoa is all, nutarani is New Zealand. She knows that that's what it says, but she blanks it out of her mind. She will not read it out.
If we do not learn from history, we're condemned to relive it.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand that we have a history made up of not two races, but two nations. The Maori nation existed prior to the treaty. It engaged in a treaty with another nation. And if you look at the te tiriti, the last few words of the first clause, where we tuku atu ki te kuine o Ingarangi, the rangatiratanga o rātou whenua, not mātou whenua, not tātou whenua, rātou whenua. We knew exactly what we were signing. We gave to her the right to govern her lands.
Okay, firstly, let's have a look whether Elle is correct, that in the first article of the treaty, it states that the chiefs allowed the Queen to govern her land as opposed to the chief's land. Here it is in English. It's addressed to the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes and other chiefs, so that's all the chiefs. That's these ones here, Rangatira Wakaminanga, the Confederation. Cede to the Queen of England forever the entire sovereignty of their country. Their country meaning the chiefs, because that's who it's directed to. Addressed here, Arata Wenua. So Kina tonu atu means forever, indefinitely, continuing on. Te kawanatanga means the governance. Katoa means all. Orato Wenua, of their lands. There is Wakaminanga, the chiefs of the Confederation. She's got that entirely wrong.
You know, the fundamental difference between the treaty and te tiriti, and how that fits for me into a trajectory of Maori thinking going back to Hakaputanga in 1835, which was a trade document. I mean, we knew after that ship had been impounded in Sydney in 1831 because we didn't have a flag, we knew the Aussies just wanted everything that was inside. I mean, if you have a look at Hazel Petrie's book, we produced 34,000 pounds worth of manufactured goods that we sold into Sydney in 1831 when you could buy a ship for 500.
Yeah.
That's Maori commerce, that's Maori enterprise. And so when we lost that ship because it wasn't flying a flag of nationhood, guess what we did? We created a nation.
Yeah.
We created a nation. I think that while Ella Henry has associations to the tribes in the far north, she and Rickard are both taking liberties here. They're trying to claim that any tribe that achieves anything is we or us as opposed to white people or foreigners. The ship she is discussing was the schooner Sir George Murray. It was acquired by Ngāpuhi chiefs Patuoni, Nini and a few others. So it was a Ngāpuhi ship, not a Maori ship. Its crew and captain Thomas MacDonald were all of mixed descent. Actually, everyone who ever lived is of mixed descent, and we all whakapapa back to Africa. We'll have a look at Henry's false claim that He Waka Putanga was a trade agreement soon. However, Like Henry, the next guest Rickard speaks to also states that it was Ngāpuhi who created He Wakaputanga, or the Declaration of Independence. He frames the lead up to this document by claiming that Wakaminanga, or the Confederation of United Tribes, was formed in 1827. Now, one thing I want you to notice is Eru Kapakingi is only talking about his tupuna, or his ancestors Ngāpuhi. But Rickard, who is not Ngāpuhi, keeps referring to us and we. She is doing the same as all the other guests, imagining Maori are separate, superior kind of people to Pakeha or tauiwi. That's white people or foreigners.
We talk about He Whakaminenga. Who was that? Who were they?
Yeah, Te Whakaminenga, the very first meeting that they had was in 1827, right? So that was like ages before Whakaputanga was created. And it was, that hui was led out by my tupuna Hongi Hika, and it took place at a settlement called Te Ngaire in Whangaroa, close to Kaio in Te Taitokele. At Arako, that's has the name Te Ara Kaufo. So that's where Te Whakaminenga first met. And it was a congregation of rangatira from Ngāpuhi from across Te Taitokele, led by Hongi Hika and attended by other revered leaders of the rohe at the time. Now, Hongi in this hui, his biggest worry, again, was these settlers that weren't complying with tikanga, that were stealing land, and that weren't respecting the mana of tangata whenua, the mana of ngaiwi me ngā hapu o Ngāpuhi at that time. That was the very first meeting they had. About 4 years later, that same confederation of rangatira, they created a petition and they sent that over to the King of England at the time. And lo and behold, the kōrero inside was expressing the worries that they had around settlers that were coming in to Aotearoa, and their failures to abide tikanga Māori. Tikanga aiwi, tikanga hapu. A couple years later, the King of England sends over a fella called James Busby.
Here is that letter in both English and the Ngāpuhi dialect, so we can read what it says. Eru stated that the only purpose of the 1831 petition was that Hongi Hika was worried about the behaviour of settlers and their failure to abide by tikanga. Firstly, Hongi Hika's name is not on the letter, but it is signed by 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs. If I grab the highlighter and we quickly go through it. So it says, King William, we the chiefs of New Zealand assembled at a place called the Keri Keri, write to thee, for we hear that thou art the great chief of the other side of the water, since the many ships which come to our land are from thee. We are a people without possessions. We have nothing but timber, flax, pork, and potatoes. We sell these things, however, to your people. Then we see the property of the Europeans. It is only thy land which is liberal towards us. You wouldn't think that listening to the academics. From thee also come the missionaries who teach us to believe in Jehovah, God, and Jesus Christ, his son. We have heard that the tribe Marian, well, that's the French, is at hand, coming to take away our land. Therefore, we pray thee to become our friend and the guardian of these Idians, lest the teasing of other tribes should come near us, and lest strangers should come and take our land away. Now, we'll cover this in a minute, but there's what they haven't mentioned here is there's a French naval ship, La Favourite, had arrived in the bay in October 1831. I'll just finish the letter. And if, right, it says, if any of those people should become troublesome and vicious towards us, we pray that thee will be angry with them, that they may be obedient, lest the anger of the people of this land will fall on them. So this letter is from us, the chiefs and the natives of New Zealand. So it's the Ngāpuhi chiefs, and there's all their names here. To the context of the letter. The letter was drafted in response to the arrival of the French naval vessel La Favourite in the Bay of Islands in October 1831. This event raised fears among Ngāpuhi chiefs about the potential French retribution for the murder of explorer Marion Dufresne in 1772, and more broadly concerns about foreign incursions and intertribal conflicts. Now, the purpose of the letter was a petition signed by 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs seeking protection and guardianship from King William IV. They were looking for an ally to help them to maintain their sovereignty in the Ngāpuhi region, protect their lands from foreign threats, and manage the increasing European influence. So Eru has it entirely wrong. He failed to mention the major reason for the letter was the fear of the French, and Ngāpuhi feared the French for good reason. In 1772, after initially friendly interaction with the locals in the Bay of Islands, which is the Ngāpuhi territory, Captain Marion Dufresne and 24 of his crew were massacred. And in retaliation, the remaining crew, under the command of Crozet, killed about 250 of the locals and left. Could you imagine how scared they were when the French warships started showing up in the harbour again? After all, tribal societies were all about utu, or revenge, no matter how long it took.
It is the pou in the ground that reminds us all that our tupuna never ceded sovereignty. So if our tupuna declared to the entire world, to the universe in 1835, that we are the rangatira, we are the sovereigns of this land, then there's no way we could have given that all away 5 years later in signing Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Eru states, our tipuna never ceded sovereignty. He even has it on the t-shirt he's wearing. His rationale behind that is that in his mind, the DOI, or the Declaration of Independence, is all about the Ngāpuhi chiefs asserting that they were the rangatira and that they were the sovereigns of this land to the entire world and to the universe in 1835. But as we saw earlier, Eru has a way of completely ignoring the context of these documents and putting his own spin on them. I'm not sure whether he is intentionally lying or that he has fallen for the indoctrination as a result of his university education under the tutorship of well-known Māori radical activist Professor Margaret Mutu of AUT. Like the letter the Ngāpuhi chief sent to King William IV in 1831, the 1835 He Whakaputanga was another attempt by the British to save the people of New Zealand from probable extinction. If what Eru is saying, why is it that if I get some citations from New Zealand history, for instance, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, there's the citation here, the relevant text says, in 1835, he, James Busby, used Charles de Thery's attempt to declare a sovereign state in the Hokianga to persuade chiefs to sign a Declaration of Independence, asserting their own sovereignty. So it was James Busby who did it. Here's another one. Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand. There's the citation, and the relevant text says, when it became known that Baron de Thery was planning to a sovereign and independent state, I think it says, Busby called a second meeting on 28th of October 1835. He persuaded 34 chiefs to sign a Declaration of Independence of New Zealand and to ask the Crown for protection. This is not what Eru is saying. This doesn't line up with what Eru is saying. And further evidence, the Governor of New South Wales at the time, Burke to Glenelg, who was the Secretary of State, War and Colonies, on 10th March 1836. He says, every motive of humanity and of national policy combined in favour of Mr. Busby's efforts to defeat the attempt of the person calling himself Baron de Thery to establish a sovereignty over the New Zealanders. The success of such a scheme would not only have introduced a new and dangerous power in the neighbourhood of our Australian colonies, but could scarcely have failed to bring about at no remote period the depopulation of New Zealand, or at least the extinction of the Aborigines. Note how even in 1836 the Governor of New South Wales, Burke, refers to the people of New Zealand as New Zealanders, meaning everyone, and the tribes people as Aborigines. So let's have a look or have a read of Busby's English draft of He Whakaputanga. Okay, so let's have a look at Article 1. It states, we the hereditary chiefs and heads of the tribes in the northern parts of New Zealand, which is basically just the Ngāpuhi era, in that little area there, being assembled at Waitangi in the Bay of Islands on this 28th day of October 1835, declare the independence of our country, which is hereby constituted and declared to be an independent state under the designation of the United Tribes of New Zealand. So this term, United Tribes of New Zealand, I always maintained that no such group ever existed. Remember, we were just talking about a few chiefs up here. What about all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chiefs all around the rest of the country? They knew nothing about this. And if we just go to the Waitangi Tribunal's Y1040, a report commissioned about this Declaration of Independence, they state the problem, however, was that prior to the declaration, this united polity did not exist. There was no formal institution to articulate the collective will apart from an embryonic confederation of chiefs. A nascent confederation acted in the instances such as the flag in 1834 and the reti initiatives, which was a punishment they had to work out for this guy. If there was no state nationality or government prior to the declaration, then it was obvious that in Busby's mind, one had to be created. So to understand this Declaration of Independence in the correct context, we must first understand that it was always Busby's intention to try and form a confederation of chiefs in New Zealand to ultimately govern New Zealand. That was his English or Scottish way of thinking. However, while it may have been possible to get a few Ngāpuhi chiefs to act in deliberation to choose a flag in 1834 or to come up with a punishment for an incident in the local area, no chief from one district would ever cede to chiefs from another district. This was particularly so, bearing in mind it was only a few years earlier that Ngāpuhi tribes under Hongi Hika were carrying out killing sprees all over New Zealand. And Eru states that the Declaration of Independence was a Ngāpuhi initiative and that it was Eruera Pari Hongi who wrote the declaration. And there is some truth in that. However, the letters between Busby and the Colonial Office make it clear that it was always Busby's idea. Busby drafted it in English. Henry Williams then translated the English draft into the Ngāpuhi dialect, and then Eruera scribed the document. And as we can see from the map of the tribes from 1800 and 1835, the hereditary chiefs consisted of just a few Ngāpuhi chiefs from a tiny part of the country. Here's Article 2. All sovereign power and authority within the territories of the United Tribes of New Zealand is hereby declared to reside entirely and exclusively in the hereditary chiefs and heads of tribes in their collective capacity, who also declare that they will not permit any legislative authority separate from themselves in their collective capacity to exist, nor any function of government to be exercised within the said territories, unless by persons appointed by them and acting under the authority of the laws regularly enacted by them in Congress assembled. Remember, this is Busby wrote this. If we just look at another dispatch from Hobson to Burke, dated 16th of January 1840, which was cited by Loveridge. It is true, a formal declaration of independence has been made by the New Zealand chiefs, but that in fact the New Zealanders but little understood the nature of that proceeding, and that they never fulfilled its obligations. No confederation had ever been formed to enact laws, nor for any other useful purpose. It was an experiment which had failed. And here's Article 3. The hereditary chiefs and heads of tribes agree to meet in Congress at Waitangi in the autumn of each year for the purposes of framing laws for the dispensation of justice, the preservation of peace and good order, and the regulation of trade, and they cordially invite the southern tribes to lay aside their private animosities and to consult the safety and welfare of our common country by joining the Confederation of the United Tribes. So at this stage, it was just the Ngāpuhi chiefs. If we go to another dispatch from Captain Hobson to Burke in 1837, he says, at present, notwithstanding their formal declaration of independence, they have not in fact any government whatsoever, nor could a meeting of the chiefs who professed to be the heads of the United Tribes take place at any time without the danger of bloodshed. And another one here, Governor Gipp's speech to the New South Wales Legislative Council in 1840. He dismissed Busby's declaration as a silly as well as unauthorised act. It was a paper pellet fired at the Baron de Theory.
What is it in he whakaputanga that can make you state categorically that we never ceded sovereignty?
Ko te kōrero e meana ko mātou ngā tino rangatira. Ka mutu he whenua rangatira. So that declaration, that very clear, simple line saying we are the sovereigns of this land and the land is also sovereign. So that wasn't a new fact created by he whakaputanga. It simply reflected the thousands of years of history of our people.
What's interesting here is Kara Rickard is all us and we around Eru Kapakingi. However, Kara's grandmother was Eva Rickard, a well-known Maori activist from Raglan with ties to Tainui, while Eru Kapakingi hails from Ngāpuhi. And these two tribes were once bitter enemies, with Ngāpuhi inflicting one of the most savage defeats on the Tainui in New Zealand's history at the Battle of Matakitaki in 1822. In that battle, Hongi Hika claimed to have killed and cannibalized at least 1,500 men, women and children, some of whom would have been Kara's relatives. Additionally, a couple of hundred were taken as slaves by Hongi and his Ngāpuhi warriors. This event was just a few years before Busby's drafted the declaration that they're discussing. Yet here they both are, sitting privileged positions in our National Museum Te Papa, undoubtedly paid handsomely by Radio New Zealand with a high-end film crew funded by government grants, and they can't help themselves. It's all we, us, our nation. They are pushing a narrative of brown Maori superiority over white Pakeha, who they label as foreign race people or tauiwi. But to adopt this twisted racist view of history, they must both first allow a mind virus into their heads that ignores the reality of actual genocides their ancestors either initiated or suffered by. Even though the Declaration of Independence had almost nothing to do with Ngāpuhi or Māori, these activist academics often use the Declaration of Independence to try and assert that Māori had already established sovereignty in 1835, 5 years prior to Te Tiriti. However, if they were real academics, i.e. they did some actual research, they would know that nominal legal jurisdiction over New Zealand was granted to New South Wales in April 1787. Let's grab a highlighter. It says here in Alexander Turnbull Library email here, it says it here. And then on the representation of the Crown, New Zealand was proclaimed a dependency of New South Wales on 9th November 1814. That's this proclamation here. And that Ngāpuhi chiefs had been appointed justices of the peace. Here they are here, Shangi, Korokoro and Dewatera at the same time. So Eru Kapakingi's assertion that revered Ngāpuhi chief Hongi Hika and others were asserting sovereignty in 1835, when Hongi Hika, also known as Shangi, and his nephew Dewatera were justices of the peace appointed by the British Crown in 1814. And yes, Hongi, appointed Justice of the Peace in 1840, is the same Hongi who massacred Eva Rickard's Tainui. Look, I only point these facts out because it is yet more evidence that while the British wanted the chiefs of New Zealand to assume a confederation and govern their own land, the facts are, though, that because they were hundreds of separate nations meant that that would never happen. And that is precisely why the British asserted their sovereignty over the separate tribes in New Zealand via Te Tiriti in 1840. For context, this is a map of the tribal areas of just the North Island in the year 1800. This was prior to the Muscat Wars, when there were about 120,000 people in the North Island. And it shows there are hundreds of small and separate tribes everywhere, with chiefs ruling their own dominions with their own tribal names as they wished. It even gives dates of arrival of some showing around 950 AD and others showing 1350 AD. This is by no means one nation. And after the Muscat Wars ended in about 1845, the population was reduced to 72,000 for the entire country. And many of the tribal names shown on this 1800 map on the screen were wiped from the face of the earth. This is the nuance that is required when looking at New Zealand's history.
Got this historical jurisdiction. So when it's first set up in 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal is only able to look at claims which relate to Crown actions from 1975 onwards.
Oh, wow. So not all the way back from all the bad things they did when they took all of our land.
That's correct, yeah.
What future does our nation have when our country's largest radio network allows their presenter to state that they, white foreigners, are all bad and took all of the land, which is a lie, and her expert guest agrees with her? None of the educators and academics they have interviewed in this series understand Te Tiriti or our history. They are playing the same social engineering role as the governments and academics played in 1930s Nazi Germany, asserting the superiority of the Maori race, just as the Nazis asserted the superiority of the Aryan race. The treaty, Te Tiriti, was addressed to all New Zealanders and made us all one nation. And while there were some difficulties in resolving who owned what land because of tribal warfare and wholesale land sales by chiefs post the signing, all of these separate nations came together as one people, or he iwi tei tātou, as Hobson said to each chief as they signed Te Tiriti at Waitangi, February 6, 1840. Our real history is that post Te Tiriti, coming together as one nation, it took just 110 years for New Zealand to become one of the safest and productive nations per capita anywhere in the world. Every New Zealander benefited from that wonderful period, which I was born into in the 1960s, which is why I spend so much time calling out these racists. And as I stated at the beginning, it is the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 that asserts racial superiority and bastardizes the treaty that is at the heart of all this racism. And it simply has to go. And if you've made it to the end, I thank you for your time. This has been Andy Oakley Investigates.